Rutgers football survives a major scare from defending MAC champion Ohio on Thursday night in Piscataway, 34-31. Jumped out to a big lead, 31-14, gave up 17 unanswered points. It was a tie game in the fourth quarter. David Anderson's back. We talked about this in the preview. We talked about it 2 weeks ago. We got a lot of flack, raising concerns on the defense, talking about playing a good MAC team, could spell trouble. It turned out that all of that kind of came to fruition. Fortunately, Rutgers was able to turn out the clock down the stretch and ice out the game. This is our rapid reaction. David, what are your initial thoughts, takeaways from this 3-point victory, the opening game of the 25 season?
I'd say everything that we thought was going to be good was better, and everything that we were a little concerned with was slightly worse. But again, this is the first game, and so you take everything with a grain of salt. They call week 2 overreaction week for a reason, because everything is either the greatest thing since sliced bread or the end of the world.
Yeah, I think let's start with the offense. I think the offense was as good as or a little bit better than advertised. I think Callie Kmanis looked like a veteran quarterback that has taken a step forward. He was far more accurate tonight, 18 of 23. Wasn't under a great deal of pressure, but was very accurate. Even the 5 incompletions, a couple really weren't his fault. Sheffield had that drop early on. And I thought, he did a good job of spreading things out. The big 3 wide receivers, let's just go through a little stats and then I'll let you comment. But overall, Callie Kmanis, 18 of 23, 78.3% completion percentage, 252 yards, 2 touchdowns. Most of it coming in the first half because Ohio controlled the game in the second half, getting the ball in the second half, scoring, Rutgers punting, and then a long scoring drive again. Ian Strong looked fantastic, 7 catches, 100 yards, looked like the guy, took another step forward. Sheffield, had an early drop, was nervous, but his explosiveness, his big playability was certainly so showcased on that 54-yard touchdown, had 85 yards on 4 catches. KJ Duff also looked good, 5 catches, 54 yards, and a touchdown. And then your running backs, Raymond and Campbell were a 2-headed monster. Raymond, 14 attempts, 88 yards, 6.3 average with a touchdown, had a long of 29 yards. And then CJ Campbell, 10 attempts for 70 yards, 7 yards average, had a run of 22 yards. A lot of weapons on this offense. I thought Shiraka called a great game. You saw Rutgers then kind of slow it down and control the clock. 2 long drives to end the game, the field goal, which Callie Kmanis did miss Sheffield in the end zone. And then that last drive to ice the game. Overall thoughts, assessment of the offense in game 1.
Yeah, I think they did better than we thought. The other thing that we have to make sure we highlight is the yards after contact. There were several key plays. There was one by Kenny Fletcher where he weaseled for like a 7-yard gain instead of 3 or so. I think that was what his catch was. Yeah, 7 or 6. They gave him 6 yards, but that was critical in terms of not getting stopped at first contact. There was a couple other ones. Sheffield's first conversion on the first drive after his drop, he shook it off and made that. There was 2 by Duff and Strong. One would have actually been more yards, but Duff just got his toe on the out of bounds side. But overall, offensive skill position guys, you couldn't ask for anything more than they did. Yards after contact, getting open. There were plenty of plays where multiple guys were open and he just chose one of them type of thing. The only thing I would say is on the offensive line, like we talked about, they're good enough to when the defense has to respect both the run and a pass in a given situation, they're good. But what Ohio started doing in that second half, which only held Rutgers to a field goal, is they would just play for 3rd and short or other short yardage. And every single time in short yardage, they sold out. And it was kind of like a run blitz, but they were bringing so many guys that in effect was just serving as a pass blitz as well. The one incompletion Nathan had on a 3rd down, he rolled to the right when if he would have just stepped up in the pocket or to the left, it would have allowed his right tackle, I think it was the tackle, Taj White, who was there, rather than it may have been the tight end, but it would have allowed him to just step away from the pressure, give his protection a little bit more time. Instead, he just went outside which is the worst thing you could do, which just allowed the defender to just be all over him. So that was like a minor error. But again, I think the offensive line did pretty well in pass protection and in run blocking when they were wearing them down in a drive. Great job. When they were on 1st and 10, great job. It was only in those short yardage that they don't really have the overwhelming guys on that line to just shove the other team back on short yardage if they bring extra people. But again, I mean, that's kind of what we expected going into this season, and we talked about all offseason. How did you think the offensive line played?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point that is still a concern, right? Because if they're not able to overpower a MAC team, which albeit a very, very good MAC team, the odds of them being able to do that in Big Ten play against the middle of the pack or better is pretty unlikely. So I think, as you said, it's the first game. There's not reason to panic per se, but I think there are some warning signs that we saw, that we flagged before the season, that we saw tonight, that I don't know how much better some of these things will necessarily get. Overall, I agree. The offensive line, I think also those last 2 drives were critical to be able to, even though it just came up with a field goal, it was the winning field goal and it was a 13-play drive. So it also kept their offense off the field. It took away some momentum that Ohio had. It did kind of reset the game and give Rutgers back to control. So credit to the offensive line there. And also, other than giving up a sack on that first drive, they kept Kalikmanis upright most of the game. I thought that was good. Also, another impressive thing, Rutgers 5 for 5 on 4th down conversions in this game. Not very good 3rd down, 1 of 9, but 5 of 5 on 4th down is, obviously good. And I also was encouraged, especially early on, with Shiano being aggressive on that first TD drive, going for 2 4th down conversions and getting both and scoring on that second one. So overall, I thought the offense acquitted itself very well, and the offensive line, I thought, they were fine. I think the encouraging part is the running backs. I think that, you see 2 capable running backs there. Benjamin had a really nice run at 1.2. Kalikmanis didn't have a lot of room to run tonight, but, we know that he can be effective at times. So I think to your point, the offense, my favorite part, though, is maybe Brock Vereen calling Dante Chen by far the most athletic left tackle in the country when he was playing inside at guard. That was probably my favorite moment of the telecast. But aside from that,
and then proceeded to give up an immediate pressure.
yeah.
I mean, it didn't play bad, but that was like his one probably worst play of the game.
Yeah, but I mean, listen, I like Dante Chen. I thought he was fine, but to call him the most athletic left tackle by far was crazy. But listen, I think the offense is what we had hoped it would be. I think now we turn the concern to the defense, which is, obviously was a major liability in this game. Rutgers getting outgained 440 yards to 399. In terms of, 3rd down, Ohio was efficient, 5 for 10. They were 1 of 1 on 4th down. Also, one negative for Rutgers in the second half. They had 0 penalties committed in the first half, had 5 in the second half. That did hurt them, but no turnovers. But no forced turnovers by the defense. Ohio, we could talk about Parker Navarro. I mean, he's a gamer. He arguably, as good as Kalikmanis was, Navarro really injected a lot of momentum for that team in the second half and almost pulled it off. What are some thoughts on the defense?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a lot of aspects to it. One is coaches understanding their scheme. I think there was some scheme stuff that will improve no matter who's on the field. It was the first game. You're playing a team that has their same offensive coaching staff, their QB. I think that can get better. The overall concern is just the lack of team speed. I mean, one of the reasons they had very few even opportunities to make a big play. There was a couple, there's one tip ball. There was one that a receiver took off the hands on a 3rd down when the first time Ohio punted that probably should have been caught, that perhaps this Rutgers safety might have caught on a bounce. But for the most part, Rutgers only had 3 passes defended on 31 attempts, and it didn't feel like there were many times where they were just inches away. They were a foot or yards away. And that does not lead us to be encouraged that they're going to force a lot of turnovers, especially because up front, they did go with their NASCAR package early in the second half with, Weaver, O'Neal, Walker, and Thompson, and they couldn't stop the run, if I remember right. They just went right down the field on that drive. And so I think kind of what we said in the spring, the coaches have to figure out if certain guys are better maybe as a starter than the second guy, but the second guy is faster on that defense, they might just have to put more speed on the field and hope that they improve. And obviously they tried it, so it's not like they didn't try it. They tried it on the defensive line in that one sequence, but maybe they need to keep the beef on the line, but then have the fastest possible people in the back end, like maybe Al-Shadi Salam or something like that, because overall, Ohio was not a fast team. They weren't running that fast, and it still felt like Rutgers couldn't just close ground like they needed to on a lot of those plays. Jet Elad had an up and down first game, a couple great plays, a couple not so great plays. And I just feel like we talked about one of our concerns is too much pressure on him to make a lot of those tackles on the backside. And we saw the good and the bad in this game.
Yeah, that one play in the first half, he had a terrible angle to tackle and kind of just threw out his arm. And, it looked really bad. That was with Ohio driving down. Ohio averaged 6.5 yards rush per rush on 31 attempts. We saw Navarro kind of, have some big runs for the Bobcats. He had a 28-yard rush. He averaged over 10 yards a carry. They only got 4 QB hits on him all night, no sacks. I think aside from the speed that you mentioned, that's a concern. I also think the lack of size. Going against a MAC team, I mean, that defensive line, they were not they did not overpower Ohio.
Right. They were stout, like Alec was talking about in our crossover. They stood pretty tall in the middle for the most part, but they were not setting the edge like we talked about in the preview. If you don't seal that edge, and there were several plays where Rutgers kind of set the edge okay. They didn't allow the back to get outside, but then a guy kind of ran inside for 5-6 yards until help arrived. That's still better than giving up a 20 or 30 or 40-yard run because you didn't let him get to the perimeter. But there was just too many yards available in between the tackles in this game. And to your point, I hope that's correctable, but we'll probably find out a lot more next week.
Yeah, again, there's always a first game overreaction, and I hate doing it, and I don't want to be part of that. At the same time, how much can you coach size and speed if that's an issue, especially when you're not even playing a Big Ten team? I think defensive line wise, I thought Weaver looked, he made some good plays at times. He generated some pressure. O'Neal really didn't do much at all. He had 3 tackles. I think, again, it doesn't mean that they won't have success in Big Ten play, but I think the overwhelming thought was they would dominate in these types of games to show at least that they would be serviceable or better in Big Ten play. And they didn't make a huge impact in this game. So Weaver could be going, they obviously know Weaver really well from being on that team last year. Could be an emotional thing as well. So we'll see how they do against Miami, Ohio next week. The one standout in defense who, is obviously super encouraging, and Kaj Sanders played a good game as well, had 9 tackles, but Moses Walker, 13 tackles, 5 solo, 8 assists, had 2 solo tackles for loss, had a big stop on Ohio's last drive that, maybe changed the game and kept Ohio from getting into the red zone. What were your thoughts on him? How much is it improvement? How much is it just 2 years after a major injury? How much of it is him seeing the field better? And is there hope now that maybe something's clicked and he's going to be the Moses Walker we always kind of hoped and believed he would be?
I think it's a little bit of both. I do think that there was some just volume tackling there where obviously the plays seemed to be in his area more often than they were in Jabome's area, which I don't know if Ohio did that on purpose. My guess is yes, because they seemed like a very well-coached team. But at the same time, I have to give Moses Walker credit for some of his other tackles that weren't just in his area per se, where there was at least 2 that I remember plays where he had to readjust, turn around, take a bad angle, and kind of dive and just use his hand strength, in effect, to trip up a guy that saved – it turned it may have been a 3 or 4 yard gain, but it could have been 12 if he didn't make those stops. And that agility, I think, is a bigger deal. I don't know if it's a straight line speed, but perhaps with his injury, it took longer for some of that lateral agility to come back. That's my, one of my biggest reasons for optimism, to your point, heading into later in the season, is like, what can this defense, where is it reasonable to believe this defense will be better? And if Walker can play that good every week, even if he doesn't put up as many tackles, that paired with Jabome should slow down teams that don't have as good of execution as Ohio. Because even though they're a MAC team, their execution was generally excellent. And so if Walker can play like that with Jabome, you got time for Abram Wright to potentially heal up, the younger guys to develop even more. I was pleased, but I don't want to just, pump the brakes on him being, a Bednarik Award candidate because after one game, because again, I think a lot of times the plays were just in his area. And so but that to say, I think he'll get even better after this week. Now that he's got a good film out there from one game.
Yeah. And even though the plays were in his area, the fact is he made those plays.
Right.
So,
exactly.
I just thought at times, like that second drive that Ohio went down the field to score and tie the game, they just looked out of sorts. So we did kind of talk about how there's a lot of new personnel on defense. How would that look? And I think we, as concerned as we were, we knew there was going to be some of this, right? That there was going to be a kind of feeling out period for this defense to kind of learn how to play with each other. Fortunately, they had the best learning lesson they could. They made a lot of mistakes and they still won the game. So that's the most important thing in all this. And of course they can get better, but I do think we both kind of feel like we saw some things that we were talking about before the season that did show up on film in this game. And, I think, again, going back to how much of it is a scheme, how much is it coaching strategy, how much is it, kind of mindset in terms of being aggressive or not, and how much of it is just having the players or not having the players to be able to compete. So it's going to be very interesting to see where this leads, and obviously going into next week. But we really won't know for sure, I think, again, until Iowa, which is obviously going to be a physical game. Any last thoughts on the defense?
Yeah, I mean, on defense, Kyle Sanders kind of had a quiet 9 tackles, like you said, which is usually a good thing for a safety. I think he's faster than he's playing right now. So there's reason to believe that a tandem of him and Elad, if they can clean up a little bit more, my fear again is like there were not signs that Rutgers was going to make big plays on defense. Again, they could have been playing a little bit conservative. It felt like when they did blitz or they showed different looks, they may have telegraphed it too much, and Parker Navarro was able to sniff it out. Like if the one play that comes to mind, it was like it might have been a second down, not a third down, but they were deep inside their own territory. Rutgers brought the blitz, and then Navarro had a double move perfectly set up, and Rutgers had no safety help, and they're lucky that the receiver had to adjust because he just kind of threw a duck, and the receiver ended up catching it and kind of falling down at like the 40-yard line. If that was a well-thrown ball, he's gone, potentially, right? Yeah. And then that was the one time I remember Rutgers going basically cover 0. And there was plenty of other times where it looked like Rutgers thought they were going to bring pressure, and they sniffed it out. They went against it. They went the other direction, and Rutgers didn't have the backside pursuit. Like what we've seen from some Rutgers Giano teams in years past is even if the quarterback kind of rolls to one side because he sees the pressure coming, Rutgers has the athletes to just race from the back end. You think of a Kasim Green, a Steve Longa type guy, and they don't have that right now at linebacker. So how do they adjust? I think what we're going to probably end up seeing is in some of these games, they're going to have to go with the Washington game plan where they almost from last year, where they just force the action. It's not necessarily a blitz, but it's like you purposely leave a certain part of the field open, you let them throw it there, and then you swarm because you know that's where they're going to go with the ball. I think that at minimum is something that the team's going to have to do a little bit of.
Yeah, great point. And I don't have all the analytics out yet, but Ohio's had at least 5 plays from scrimmage over 24 yards. Yeah. So that's a concern. Again, Navarro's a really good quarterback, but definitely major concern with the defense after this performance. Shifting to special teams, a huge positive in this game. Weren't perfect, but definitely outplayed Ohio. Obviously, you had the block punt with a touchdown. with Sanders and then Cam Miller falling on it, getting a touchdown. They had Ohio made a couple of mental mistakes, but they penned them on the 4 that time. Overall, just wholly outclassed them. Patel set a Rutgers record for 14 consecutive made field goals now. So all in all, a very encouraging, positive night for the special teams.
Yeah, I mean, you only had to have one punt the whole game. Kickoffs, there was that one that they kicked out of bounds, but then you saw later in the game what he was trying to do because Dino Kaliakmanis, I think it was, came flying in and made a tackle inside the 5-yard line that gave Ohio really bad field position. So you can see why that kind of pop corner kick, coffin kick might be effective. Rutgers may have been able to return better than they did a little bit, but overall, yes, if the defense, if the special teams weren't elite, Rutgers probably loses this game, even if they played parallel. I mean, obviously the block kick alone, that's at least a 7-point swing. Maybe not, because it's possible Rutgers doesn't block the kick and they catch it at the 50 and then they march down for a score because they hadn't been stopped at that point anyway. But really, that block punt was key also for momentum in that moment. And that was how Rutgers jumped out to the lead they jumped out to. And so I think for them to win these 60-40 games, I mean, this probably goes down as a 60-40 game with Rutgers 60, maybe 40, because this was close. That special teams is going to have to win those games or at least not lose them. In this game, they did more than just not lose it. They were one of the biggest factors in the win.
All right, a couple closing points. My question for you, and I can answer it after you, is basically how concerned are you that Schiano could have an overreaction to this game? Meaning, the offense I thought was pretty balanced tonight. I thought they were aggressive at times, maybe a little more aggressive than I even thought they would be in the opener against Ohio. Maybe that was partly the mindset, kind of being concerned about their own defense, but they obviously were able to gain control late in the game with the grind, running the clock out after Ohio had kind of done it to them the whole game. How much do you worry that Schiano could overcorrect and get too conservative moving forward and not trusting the offense that obviously is full of weapons? And really, I think at this point, you just got to let them cook.
Medium concern. One of the things that we talked about is there's a such thing as scoring too fast, but that I think Alec was talking about it in the preview. If you have to score, you have to score. Like in the Big 12, like Scarlett Rogue was talking about, like I remember Geno Smith games where, West Virginia's putting up 70 and they were winning by 6 or 7 points. Like if you got to score, you got to score and just hope your D can get a stop, If Rutgers defense, the funny thing is if Rutgers defense was a little better tonight, I actually think I'd be more worried about him being conservative. But I think he realizes that, like, hey, in the second half, when Rutgers got even a tiny bit conservative, they put up 3 points.
Yeah.
After they put up, 31 if you count the block kick, so 24 in the first half, the offense put up 3 points in the second half. And so it was kind of a carbon copy of that Kansas State game in that sense, right? Big lead, they end up winning, but big lead gets shrunk. You're in basically a one-score game late in the fourth quarter, and I don't think he's going to overreact in week 2. But again, we'll know more as the ongoing Miami of Ohio, Wisconsin games happening. When we started recording, it was still 0-0. Both teams had exchanged punts a couple times. So obviously we'll have to see what happens with Miami. From what I saw early, what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to clear you out and throw a lot of these like little like dump offs almost, either like short out routes to quick shifty like slot receivers or even backs, which I would say is a major concern. But I don't think after one game he's going to fundamentally change the game plan. It's possible that maybe we'll just see more like pressure, the safeties coming down, but I don't think there's going to be a major change to scheme or personnel after one game.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I'm more concerned once we get the Big Ten play, and let's just say even they do jump out to a 10-0 lead against Iowa. Are we going to shrivel up and go into the fetal position and try to win that game 10-0? So we'll see what happens there.
Right, because like we said, they tonight the offensive line was good, but they weren't good enough to just manhandle the D when the D knew a run was coming. And I don't know if there's reason to believe that they will do that against Big Ten teams if they weren't doing it against Ohio, who is replacing their entire defensive line. Again, I'm not criticizing the offensive line. I'm not saying they're bad. for anyone who's going to say that, take it out of context. I'm just saying they're not good enough that they can just steamroll people like we saw, let's say in 2006 or even 2014 when Rutgers has a lead, that even though they know a run's coming, they can just run. Like I don't, and this is the same thing we saw last year. So it's not that they're worse. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I don't think that was ever their ceiling, to be honest with you. I know you feel the same way. I think it was just it's a matter of, can they be consistent enough to provide enough coverage, for Calais Manis? Can they provide enough room for those backs to get creases and get room? Just to be good enough. I think, can they be a 7 out of 10? I don't think anyone's expecting them to be dominating, but that's where things could start to go backwards, where if some of the other things aren't clicking and you need them to really have a huge game and they can't be able to do that, then that could be a problem. But that's a question for another day.
Overall, let me ask you one thing. Let's leave it on a positive so everyone knows that we're trying to be positive here.
Yes.
What's your biggest positive takeaway from this game? A player, a scheme, a moment? What was the biggest thing that was better than you thought it would be?
That Rutgers legitimately has multiple weapons in the backfield and at receiver. I think that, the balance there, I think for Shiraka, he's at his best when he has options, when he can kind of play, keep the defense off balance with what he's doing. And I think that comes with diversity and his ability to spread the ball out. And they didn't show everything tonight, I don't think. But Strong, Sheffield, and Duff, looked like a great 1-2-3 combo at receiver. And then Campbell and Raymond. Raymond held up his end of the bargain on blocking on third downs. I thought it was pretty good there. So overall, I think the offensive weapons that Calais Manis has to work with, overall as a whole, looked better after one game, and he was a lot more accurate, I thought, because in his decision making. So all in all, I'm even more encouraged by the offense than I was going into the game.
Good. All right. Well, we'll see what happens with Miami of Ohio. Well, I mean, for me, I think you're right. I mean, I could also say Moses Walker, could say the special teams all were better.
Yeah.
Probably Moses Walker was the only thing on defense that I say stood out compared to what we kind of thought. So hopefully somebody else is that next week, and each week it's somebody new. But special teams, maybe mine would be just the mentality. Like even against a MAC team, they generally played it aggressive on special teams other than a few times in the return game. And I think that was important to the psyche, that the team did feel like they were trying to win, not trying to not lose. Because Ohio, from the first kickoff until the whistle blew at the end of the game, they were playing to win. And to beat a team that's playing to win, that's competent, you also have to play to win. And I felt like Rutgers did that in all three phases, even though it ended up being close.
Yeah, and again, at the end of the day, they survived, and that's the most important thing. And now you have another MAC team coming in. You're going to be a little bit better prepared. Obviously, we talked about the Red Hawks are playing the Badgers of Wisconsin right now. We'll see how that result comes. We'll be back to preview that game next week. But wanted to get a recap out right away, a rapid reaction for Rutgers opening the 2025 season with a 34-31 win over Ohio. 5 more to a bowl game. Still on the path. Again, game one, overreactions, certainly more positives than negatives. Let's just hope the negatives aren't so great that it, overrides the positives that we saw, and think we'll be pretty consistent and show up game after game this season. For the Scarlet Faithful, David Anderson, thanks so much for being here. I'm Aaron Brightman, and we'll talk to you soon.
Go Knights.